Welcome to US Movie Reruns. The title of this movie is The Shallows. Remember to subscribe for more movie reruns. Caution: spoilers ahead. A medical student named Nancy Adams decides to go on a vacation. She had wanted to visit her mother's favorite beach for some time now. She was supposed to meet her friend Anna there, but while on her way with a local tour guide, she was led to understand that Anna will not be joining her. However, Nancy still takes the trip alone and thanks the local tour guide named Carlos. After having a short conversation, Carlos leaves and Nancy prepares to surf. She jumps into the water and dives under a big wave to go further. Shortly afterwards, Nancy comes across two other surfers who were there. They informed her that there are some rocks on one side of the beach and there's only one tide a day, and what time that tide changes. Nancy and the other surfers caught some nice waves. Then returns to the shore and looks at some photos of her mother who died from cancer. She also video called her younger sister Chloe, telling her the beach is as beautiful as her mother had described. Then she speaks to her father, who is worried that she might drop out of medical school. However, Nancy doesn't engage in details with her father and tells him she will see them soon. After the call, she went back in the water again to surf. The other two surfers call it a day and leave, but Nancy wanted to catch one last wave before leaving. However, she sees a whale carcass from afar and decides to take a closer look. The seagulls are acting strange overhead, and it distracted Nancy, causing her to fall off her board. What Nancy did not realize is that the whale had died from injuries it sustained from a great white shark. She seemed a little freaked out and was making an attempt to get to shore, but the shark knocked her off her board. Nancy quickly tries to get back to her surfboard, but the shark attacks again, this time biting her and pulling her underwater. Nancy could only scream because she was separated from her board and is helpless in the situation. However, the shark somehow lets go of her and she swam and got on top of the dead whale's carcass. With a severe wound on her leg, she used a surfboard strap to compress the wound and prevent further blood loss. She could see the silhouette of the two surfers on shore and she tried shouting for help, but they were too far gone. Meanwhile, the shark pushes the whole carcass further past the shallows. Nancy then swims towards a big rock as the hungry shark gave chase. Unfortunately, Nancy steps on a fire coral, but she pushes past her pain to escape the predatory fish narrowly. On top of the rock, now Nancy takes some time to catch her breath. The shark, on the other hand, circled in close proximity to the rock, stalking Nancy, it would appear, and waiting for the opportune time. With nowhere to go and full of aches, Nancy has no choice but to stay on the rock and calculate her next move. While there, she used her earring and necklace to stitch up her wound. Despite the excruciating pain, she manages to finish the procedure and covers the wound with her rash guard. As the sun sets, Nancy looks at her watch and sees it's 5 hours to low tide. However, it becomes cold as night falls, so Nancy had to remove her rash guard from her thigh to stay warm. She then loosens her surf strap to allow blood flow in her leg, and after tightening it again, then uses the sleeve of her rash guard as a compression band. She was famished and tried eating a small crab but throws up. However, an eagerly waiting seagull eats it as it has a broken wing. This left Nancy disgusted. Nancy looks around. She notices that her surfboard is floating several feet away from her. She is not sure if the shark is out there, but she still decides to retrieve it. She barely sets foot in the water and had to climb back on the rock because the shark was waiting. She agitated her injuries on her return to the rock. Later on, Nancy saw a drunken man on the shore. With this, her chance to be rescued, she shouted repeatedly until the man notices her. She tries to tell him to call for help, but the drunken man could not understand her gestures and shouting. He was way too stoned. Refusing to give up, Nancy signaled for the man to walk to the other side of the shore and get her phone. However, instead of helping Nancy and calling for help, the man decides to rob her. Fatigued and in pain, hungry and thirsty, Nancy begs the man to help her, but he just ignores her. Being a greedy bastard, before he leaves, he notices Nancy's surfboard in the water and tries to retrieve it. Nancy signaled him not to enter the water, but he doesn't and gets attacked by the shark, leaving his body torn in half. The following day, Nancy still remains on top of the rock, with only 6 hours to high tide. The surfers she met have returned for more surfing. Nancy tries to tell them to stop when she notices them because the shark was in the water. However, the surfers were confident no sharks are in the water and ignored her pleas to stop them. They caught a wave and the shark shows up and kills one of the men, and the other tries to make it to the rock Nancy was on, but his luck ran out. He was taken under by the shark, and only half of his board shot out of the water. Unable to help, Nancy remains on the top of the rock as she looks for signs of the surfer. Suddenly, the man resurfaces and attempts to climb on the rock, asking for help. Nancy tries, but the shark pulls him down and eats him. With 3 hours left to high tide, a dehydrated Nancy lies on top of the rock in an effort to conserve her energy. The sun was high in the sky, so Nancy uses the broken board to protect her from the sun. With only 25 minutes to high tide, the surfer's helmet and GoPro camera floated to the surface. Nancy was too exhausted to notice. Then Nancy realizes that the shark is still lurking in the water, but she doesn't have a choice but to remain on her rock. Nancy sits up slowly and tended to the injured seagull wounds. Although the bird bites her afterwards, she carefully popped the bird's wing back in place and gave it a chance to survive. After that, Nancy notices that the tide is already getting high. She also notices the flying camera and thought about getting it. Nancy observed the shark and realized it took 32 seconds to swim from the whale carcass to the rock. She timed it perfectly, but was unable to get it on her first attempt. She ended up falling into the water and hitting more corals. After some time, she tries again. This time she was successful. However, the shark lunges at Nancy, causing her to fall into the water once more, hurting herself. In its attempt to get Nancy, the shark also hurt itself on some coral that gave Nancy the opportunity to escape. Nancy quickly grabs the camera and returns to the big rock, feeling victorious. Nancy watches the camera footage and sees how the surfer was eaten by the shark. She also notices that the shark has a hook in its mouth, which suggests that someone tried to hurt it. She calculates the distance from the rock to the buoy, which is about 40 yards, thinking it will take her 1 minute to get there. She is confident in her ability to do this, but first, she needs a head start. With only 10 minutes to high tide, Nancy makes a video using the GoPro and tells anyone who'll find it she's been attacked by a shark, asking them to call for help. Nancy is already losing a lot of blood, and to make things worse, the wound is becoming infected. Nancy also feels like she's losing her strength, and she doesn't have much time. Soon the rock she's on is going to be covered soon by the tide. Nancy can't help but become emotional. She's also disappointed that she didn't get the chance to know the name of that beach. Nancy realizes that recording the video is useless, as it would not help her at this point, so she left a message for her father and sister in Texas, telling them how much she loves them and that she'll fight until the end. After that, Nancy throws the camera as far as she could, hoping it will reach the shore. She also lets the seagull float away on the broken surfboard, and as she prepares to swim, a bloom of jellyfish suddenly swims to the surface of the water. Nancy then remembers the shark getting hurt because of the coral and the jelly sting similarly. The shark would not like that. Based on this observation, Nancy dives into the water using the jellyfish to her advantage. The shark chases her, and she made sure to stay close to the jellyfish. However, she got stung, which was a small price to pay for not being eaten by the shark. She ignored the pain and swam intently towards the buoy. However, the shark slams into the buoy and Nancy falls into the water, where she holds onto a rusty rung that suddenly breaks. Nancy was relentless. She was going to fight to the end. She uses the broken rung to stab the shark before returning to the buoy. Shortly afterwards, Nancy sees what appears to be a cruise ship in the distance. She quickly searches the buoy for anything that could help get the attention of the crew members. She found a flare gun, but in her haste she accidentally drops the bullets in the water, so she tries to retrieve them. She then fires the flare gun in the air upon getting one bullet, but it isn't enough. With no other choice, Nancy grabs the rest of the bullets and fires the flare gun once again. Unfortunately, the ship has already turned away. Meanwhile, the camera finally reaches shore and a little boy picks it up. He runs home after watching the video of Nancy. The shark slams into the buoy again, breaking off the chain that secures it to the seabed. An overwhelmed Nancy fires a flare gun at the shark, which only irritates it further. The shark continuously tries to knock Nancy off the buoy as Nancy looks for a way to kill it. She decides to set the oil from the dead whale on fire, so she fires a flare into the water. This causes no harm, but made the shark more angry. It attacks the buoy and breaks another chain off. Nancy then falls into the water and gets an awful cut from a piece of metal, but that doesn't stop her from staying inside the safety of the now toppled-over buoy. Seconds later, the relentless shark chomps down on the buoy and almost destroys it, forcing Nancy to jump into the water. She then ties her ankle strap to the last chain of the buoy and pulls, causing her to be pulled down as it falls to the seabed. Meanwhile, the shark pursues Nancy in a nosedive, but she suddenly pulls out of the dive and swims to the side. The shark doesn't have time to change its direction and ends up getting pierced on the anchor bar on the seabed. The smart little boy shows Nancy's video to his father, who is revealed to be Carlos, the local tour guide. They then return to the beach and find Nancy floating near the shore, so Carlos quickly gets into the water to save her. Carlos also instructs his son to get help, and as Nancy regains consciousness and looks around, she sees the seagull that she saved. At the same time, Nancy sees a vision of her mother smiling down at her, and all she can say is that she's okay. Despite the traumatizing incident, Nancy goes to a beach in Texas 1 year later. The big scar on her leg serves as a reminder of that day. She is now a doctor and has decided to teach her younger sister how to surf, making their father say their mother will be proud of them. Thanks for watching US Movie Reruns. Remember to subscribe for more movie recaps.